Now, it's not necessary that I may start from SA 200 first, okay? See, logically speaking, there is no need to start with SA 200 first. You can start with any standard first, okay? So, let me start with something which is an important standard also, and it's an easy standard for you all, which you have already discussed in your IPCC. It's just a repetition for you. The standard is on audit documentation. You can write down the heading. So when you're writing a heading, you can update your index simultaneously. And in the index, give page number also on which page you're writing. So we are not going to do it in order. We will follow our order, own order. Easy to difficult. SA 230 is on audit documentation. Now, what is an examiner expecting you to write in this standard and how to understand? First of all, forget examiner, how to understand this standard. Let me start with audit documentation. See, in the world of technology, we may reach heights in technology. We may follow everything on computers. We may do everything we may save our data on computers. But still, one thing is always going to be with us, and that is called as papers. We will definitely require, as a chartered accountant, you always will work on papers. Okay, now you may work on electronic papers also, but you will still be having some or the other data on papers. Or you may later on make it electronic, but first the data is available in the paper form. So if I'm asking you a very simple question, what is audit documentation? Audit documentation is nothing, but these are the working papers of an auditor. Okay, audit documentations are nothing, but these are the working papers of an auditor. Now, when I'm saying working papers of an auditor, and you have to listen to my explanation also, though you're doing multitasking of writing, but listen to what I'm saying. Working papers of an auditor. Do you know that whenever you would have gone to your client's place, you would have always, got so many working papers from the clients. Sometimes the client gives you the working papers to check. Sometimes you make your own working papers. I'll give you some examples. Auditors, they may normally obtain working papers from clients. Or sometimes they may even prepare their own working papers. Both way it is possible. Now, if you are starting an audit of a company may normally first give you its memorandum copy, its articles copy, just to see whether you have understood the name of the company, the nature of business of the company, where is the regional office of the company located, and so on. So you may obtain certain working papers like copies of memorandum, copies of articles of association. You may do an audit of a trust where you may obtain a trust deed. You may do audit of a partnership firm where you may obtain a partnership deed. These are some constitutional documents which the organization is going to provide you. So that is why I've written here this word obtain. Some working papers the auditor may also prepare by himself. Like what type of working papers he can prepare? He can prepare working papers like you may calculate tax for your client. If a client knows to calculate tax, why he will hire an auditor? Okay, so that is the most important task which auditors do. They calculate taxation for their client. So tax calculation. Sometimes the client may ask you to calculate depreciation also for them. And then if he has calculated, then you may cross verify with your own calculations. Sometimes you may also make some provision entries for your client. So you may calculate provisions. Okay, on various things you have to create provisions. You may calculate that. Or you may cross verify with your client's provisions. Okay, these are some papers which you are preparing. This is what the client has given you. No matter whether you prepare or whether client gives you, no matter who prepares it, ultimately a working paper should be always kept in a working paper file. This is very important. Okay, auditor should always keep his working paper in a working paper file. Now when I'm saying he's keeping his working papers in a working paper file, that means he should keep his working papers in a safe custody. So that later on, suppose if the need arises to obtain working papers, you can immediately retrieve them. Something what is important here is retrieval of working papers. You should be in a position to retrieve them as and when the need arises. And I'm telling you honestly, it's not necessary that the year in which you preserve them, in that year only somebody wants working papers. An authority may ask some working papers from an auditor, maybe say after a certain number of years. Do you know that here Institute of Chartered Accountants of India, ICAI says, ICAI has formed an expert advisory committee on this. There is a committee which is called as Expert Advisory Committee. Sir, what is the role of this committee? Basically, this committee deals into what? This committee deals into providing expert advices, suggestions, how to improve the systems, for auditors. Now, suppose if I'm saying, what is this expert advisory committee going to do? This expert advisory committee, firstly, it comprises of chartered accountants, all experienced chartered accountants having 5 years, 10 years, 15 years experience. They say that according to ICAI's expert advisory committee, every auditor should keep his working papers at least for a period of 7 years. Okay, working papers should not only be maintained in a file, but they should also be preserved in the file. Okay, it's very important. You have to preserve your working papers, because in future, how will you justify what work you had done for your clients? It's only because of what? Preserving the working papers. So working papers should always be prepared. They should be kept in a file which is called as working paper file in a safe custody, so that they can be easily retrieved. And as per the expert advisory committee norm, you have to keep your working papers for a minimum period of 7 years. Now, when I say you have to keep it for 7 years, one more thing I want to justify here, that what is the use of preserving them? You may say, sir, what is the use of preserving working papers? You all know that you may do your audits for your client next year also. So for your future audits, working papers are really going to be helpful. You can make the audit program in a better manner only because you have preserved some working papers. So working papers can act you in planning for your future audits. Working paper can justify you that you have actually done auditing. Okay, what is the proof that you have done auditing? Today you are sitting for an auditing class, writing everything what I'm saying. Suppose if I speak for 10 hours and then you listen and you go away from here, what is the proof that you attended my lecture? Okay, so that is why I'm making you write. So tomorrow you will say that, I had attended auditing lecture and this was taught to me in the lecture. Okay, so it is a proof that you have done something during the course of audit. Otherwise, when you go and obtain remuneration from your client, the client will ask you, did you check this? Did you check that? Now you will say, sir, no, I forgot. Yes, sir, I've checked it, but I don't have any proof to show you. Do you think the client is going to trust you like this? No. The client is always requiring some proof. How will you justify your work to your client? Only on the basis of your working papers, that you really did something for him. Okay, so working papers always act as a proof in the court of law in front of the client that an auditor has performed really audits in good sense. Okay, working papers, though they are auditor's papers, but then you should not make a misuse of working papers. There is something which is called as confidentiality of working papers. What do you mean by this word? Confidentiality, very big word. Okay, confidentiality. See, what happens, you also do this every day. When you finish audit of one client, you try to communicate all this information to another client. Yesterday I was there, I did this audit for this client, and he was giving so much salary to his employees, and his employees are really working with him. And do you want those employees to be joining you? Competitor. So you shared all the confidential information of one client with another client. That you should not do. There's something called as professional ethics also. In fact, at CA final level you will be studying a full chapter on professional ethics. That will also contain this point, that an auditor should always hide the information contained in his working papers. He should not go and leak out the confidential information of his working papers of one client to another client. It's very important point. So you should always keep the working papers in a safe custody and make sure that you are not disclosing one client information to another client. It is again going to be a matter of your ethics only. If you are an ethical person, if you know how to perform audits ethically, then you will never do this point. People don't disclose only what working papers do they have. So that is something called as what? Maintaining confidentiality of working papers. One good question which I want to communicate with you, which is a past exam question. Suppose the rule is that you have to prepare working papers and preserve them for 7 years. Okay, but suppose if the need arises to have working papers for a greater than 7 years period, is it okay if you preserve it for 7 years only? That means suppose if the law requires you to keep working papers for 9 years and you kept it only for 7 years and then you destroyed them. Okay, now the law is asking you to keep it for 9 years and you destroyed them. You said, no, I preserved for 7 years. That time you never told me anything, and now suddenly you can't come and ask me for higher period of more than 7 years. So what is the answer to this question? The answer is that if an auditor comes to know that there is a need arising to preserve a working paper for a longer than 7 years period, then he should keep those working papers. You have to keep it. You have to preserve it. It does not mean that you should destroy it just because the standard says that after 7 years you can throw them them out. If there is a need to keep it for a higher period of time, maybe some matters can be discussed after 10 years audits are completed. Okay, so that time you have to show your working papers to your another auditor or maybe to an authority. For that a higher period is always justifiable. So whenever you are making working papers, make sure that though you are supposed to keep it for 7 years, but it is not at all necessary to keep it only for 7 years. You can keep it for a longer period also if the need arises. Very important point this is, so many people, what they do after 7 years, they feel that now nothing is going to take. Suppose if you are unknown, if it was unknown to you for 7 years, you kept it, nothing was known to you, then it is okay. But then law always looks evidence. There is a in Hindi we say कानून की आंखों पे पट्टी होती है. There is a not tied on in the eyes of law is not only going to ask for some evidence from you. It only requires evidence, proof. So what is the proof that you have kept the working papers? That time you have to produce the evidence in front of law. So if they ask you to keep working papers for a longer than 7 years period, you must preserve them for longer than 7 years also. That is what the standard is. It is not written in the standard, but technically a question can come on this point. So that time you should know that it is always advisable to keep it for a higher period number of years if the need arises. Of course, if need is not there, you may throw it, but then you should not throw it after 1 or 2 years. You have to preserve it for at least 7 years period. That also you have to remember. Let me tell you one more point here, that when you're making your working papers, see, after all you will become CA and you will also have some articles working with you. If you're a practicing chartered accountant, you will hire some articles with you. That time, how much article is efficiently working? Your principal would have come and seen your working papers if he is interested. Okay, first of all, the principal should be interested. So if your principal is interested, he will definitely come and see how my articles are working. So the efficiency of the article can also be known from the working papers that he prepares, so that the principal can give him some feedback. I am telling you, the articleship days are the golden days of your CA. You may find miserable, 3 years we have to struggle under one person. Nothing like that. You get to learn a lot from him. And of course, if you are working efficiently, how will you prove out your efficiency? Through your working papers only. And if you are a little inefficient person, or maybe you are not come up to the mark, he may even give you some feedbacks based on your working papers. So these are the prime reasons why auditors have to make their working papers and keep them for such a long period. Deloitte's, KPMG, Ernst & Young, PwC, the big fours of India, they consider it as a matter of quality. According to the big firms, it is a matter of quality if you prepare working papers. Your working papers can only justify your work. So these big firms always ask their articles, always ask their subordinates to keep their working papers properly in a safe custody, because according to them, it is a matter of quality. You can justify your work only on the basis of your audit documentation, that is working papers. And there are some working papers which are not only helpful in this year audit, but they may also be helpful to you in the outcoming future audits. That time you will not start for hunting working papers. You have to keep it in a safe custody. So it is a matter of quality for an auditor to prepare working papers, and not only to prepare them but also to preserve them. Have you understood or not? These are all the points which I just now explained you, which I wrote in the bullet form. This you have to write in exam if you get a question on audit documentation. And our answer that we will be preparing will be in such a manner that whatever question they ask, all the points are covered in that. Okay, so that's how you have to present it in 5 marks question, max 5 or 6 marks question. This is how you're supposed to write. Have you understood or not? Shall I dictate these points fast? Please write down. Some I'll dictate, some I'll show it to you directly on the projector so you can see the presentation that time. Yeah, you can write down the heading, working papers. What is the main heading? Audit documentation. So point number 1, first write in point form. First point, audit documentation means working papers which are prepared by an auditor and obtained by him in connection with the performance of his auditing. In connection with the performance of his auditing. Full stop. Working papers, continue, same point. Working papers ensure that audits are conducted. Working papers ensure that audits are conducted in accordance with the standards on auditing. In accordance with the standards on auditing. Full stop. Next point. An auditor can obtain working papers. An auditor can obtain working papers from his client and he may also prepare his own working papers. He may also prepare his own working papers. Full stop. Working papers, continue. Working papers will act as a proof. Working papers will act as a proof in the court of law. That audits were conducted in accordance with the principles of auditing. In accordance with the principles of auditing. And it will safeguard the interest of auditor. It will safeguard the interest of auditor. Full stop. Next point. An auditor should always keep his working papers. An auditor should always keep his working papers in a separate working paper file. In a separate working paper file in a safe custody so that they can be easily retrieved. In a safe custody so that they can be easily retrieved. Full stop. As per the expert advisory committee, continue. As per the expert advisory committee of ICAI, auditors are required to preserve their working papers for a minimum period of 7 years. For a minimum period of 7 years, though they may be preserved for a higher period if the need arises. May be preserved for a higher period if the need arises. So this is a very important point. There are 2 questions on this point in the practice manual. So if the need arises, you can keep it for a greater time period. Next point. An auditor can be called as the owner of working papers. An auditor can be called as the owner of working papers, but he should not misuse the confidential information. He should not misuse the confidential information which is contained in the working papers. He should not misuse the confidential information which is contained in the working papers. Full stop. Continue. An auditor should always try to keep his eyes and ears open. Auditor should always try to keep his eyes and ears open, but his mouth shut. Full stop. Have you understood? This is how you have to present your answer in exam. Very simple. All the points also covered, and examiner will understand and he'll give you marks for it. Is it clear? Write the correct number and the name also. Likewise, you can just read how I am giving you the notes. This is how I will be giving you notes for every chapter, not only for auditing standards, but for every chapter. And then you have to go home and read my textbook simultaneously. Tomorrow or day after you will get it. Read it simultaneously.